This is the final event of the morning is a panel on the opportunities for space entrepreneurs with respect to Mars. Okay, and the chairing the panel will be James Burk. He's a founding member of the Mars Society, and he's also our webmaster. We also have Lennart Lopin, who is the founder and president of the Marscoin Foundation, which is going to put Bitcoin in the dust, and Sean McClinton, who is president of the Seattle Space Entrepreneurs Organization and the founder of the SDM Enterprises. So take it away.
Okay, are you guys having a good conference so far? Awesome. So as Bob mentioned, my name is James Burk. I'm the IT director of the Mars Society. My background is as a former Microsoft technical project manager. And for the last 8 years, I've been doing consulting. And lately, I've been thinking a lot about startups and how I could best help people, such as yourselves, to start a company that might develop technology to help us settle Mars, but also solve some of the problems here on Earth. And in preparing for this panel, I did a lot of research, and one of the pieces of research I came across was from a gentleman named Dr. MacDonald, who works at NASA. Up until recently, he was running NASA's Emerging Space Office, which was an office at NASA headquarters that would look at the interaction with NASA and the private sector and in terms of its technology development and how those two could help each other out. I invited him to come on our panel, and he accepted. But then a funny thing happened shortly after that. He got promoted to chief economist of NASA. So he can't be here today, but he did send us a video, which we're going to go ahead and play right now to introduce things.
Greetings from NASA headquarters. Thanks to James for the invitation to provide this introduction to the panel on the economics of space and entrepreneurial opportunities in the space community. It is obviously an incredibly exciting time to be thinking about the economics of space exploration and about what kind of businesses people might be able to build. The reason is obviously because, in part, NASA is in the process of returning to the moon through the Artemis program, and also because NASA intends to use the experience and the capabilities developed by that return to the moon to enable us to ultimately put people on the surface of the red planet. But it's also an exciting time to be considering the economics of space because NASA is no longer just the only entity pushing the frontiers of technology and space capabilities. Obviously, we have private companies that are helping lead the way, as well as international space agencies. But it's also private individuals and private societies. In other words, people such as yourselves who have gathered in California to figure out how to put our collective efforts to good use in enabling humanity's journey to Mars. I hope that the panel that you are about to watch includes lots of visionary thinking and optimistic plans for the future, but that it also includes some hard-nosed questions about business plans and about funding sources and about how this is all going to come together. I hope you guys have a great panel. I hope you get stimulated by lots of interesting discussion, and I hope you have a great rest of the convention.
Awesome. Thank you, Alex. So I just want to mention a quick disclaimer. I know the way NASA works, so they'll like that I'm saying this. The opinions and views that our panelists have today are not those of NASA. They're our own, and we're not speaking for NASA. This is not an official NASA-sanctioned panel. Okay, so with that, I'd like to turn it over to our other two panelists for them to say a few words about themselves and their backgrounds and what they'd like to bring today to our discussion. So Lennart, go first.
Thanks, James. My name is Lennart Lopin. I was born in Germany, actually, for most people here, close to Peenemünde, which the Germans are very famous for. Their first rocket launch, and my grandma has a story of a rocket coming down, or several. I moved to the United States 2007. I was involved in a lot of startups throughout my business career. I'm a software engineer with background, and I'm very honored to be here on the panel today. Thank you.
Thanks, James, for organizing this panel. Thank you to the Mars Society. This is my first Mars Society conference, so this is very exciting to me. the opportunities in talking about Mars. I'm Sean McClinton. I founded and run the Space Entrepreneurs Network in the Seattle area. I have a background in sales, marketing, and operations. So in an engineering-driven industry, I found a great niche and a great purpose in this amazing future and this amazing industry. Just out of curiosity in the audience, how many of you are working on a Mars-related startup right now? So a handful of you. How many of you are thinking about a Mars-related startup? So there's probably some interesting things happening in this room, and I look forward to discussing those. Also, I run business operations at RBC Signals. So we're a Seattle area ground station company, provide low Earth orbit, GEO, MEO communication capabilities for satellite operators. About a 4-year-old company, and I've been with the company since seed financing. So kind of ridden the trajectory, and it's been an exciting ride with the startup, and I've done a few other startups. So looking forward to the panel.
Awesome. So Sean and I, we actually organized an event in Seattle back in February. That was a really great event. Had about 50 attendees. It was a joint meeting between the Seattle chapter of the Mars Society and Sean's group, the Seattle Space Entrepreneurs. We talked a lot about the economics of Mars. And one of the things that I prepared for that event was a list of 20 ideas for a Mars-related technology startup. And I posted that on LinkedIn. And so we don't have time today to share all 20 with you, but I'd like to share a few of them. So these are basically ideas that you could take and start a company around that would not only help settle Mars someday, but also could have applications here on Earth to solve problems as well. So the first idea would be concrete with Mars materials. So how do you make concrete on Mars? One idea that folks have had that doesn't really been tested a lot on Earth, because it's kind of hard to do, would be to make pycrete, which would be 86% water ice and 16% sawdust. As you can imagine, the manufacture and testing of that might be tricky here on Earth, but that's something that somebody could develop into a repeatable process, make it easy to do, and make it easy to do robotically on Mars. Another idea, dust control with air scrubbers. So the astronauts on Mars, when they go out on EVA and come back inside, they're going to be covered with dust. And Mars dust is so small that it's microscopic in some cases. And so how do you keep everything clean over several repeated EVAs? And how do you make it so that the risk to the crew members inside the habitat is lower? They're not breathing that dust. So how do you do that with a regime of dust control? Closed loop life support. This is a very difficult problem. How do you create a life support system that can replenish itself? It needs to work for years without any maintenance. If you guys remember the Biosphere 2 project, they were kind of trying to do some of this, have different biomes inside that facility that would interact with each other. But this is a very hard problem. Nobody's solved it yet, and it's definitely something we'll need to settle Mars and the rest of the solar system. Here's my favorite one, coffee, because I'm from Seattle. How do you grow coffee beans on Mars? Or synthesize the constituents of good coffee, emphasis on good coffee. So somebody could take this idea and create the Starbucks of Mars and make a few $1 billion. So there you go. Another one that I think is really important is having a certification training program for Mars. So accredited education around settling Mars. All the skills you would need to settle Mars, astronautics, materials, technology, physics, chemistry, orbital mechanics. So having a way to have repeatable and trainable educators that can give that type of certification program would be a huge business, and that could start right away because there's lots of people interested in learning about Mars. And then finally, blockchain. And so I think for this one, I'll throw it over to Lennart.
Yeah, the blockchain revolution is something that I got into relatively early 2011. So that list is actually really interesting, the whole. And I was reminded of a talk yesterday by Dr. Zubrin, how the space revolution kind of triggered the fusion startups. And I think there's a lot of these steps that when you look at it, you're surprised that nobody has actually undertaken them. Like we were talking about artificial gravity. the closed loop life support system, and really you're wondering like what has been happening. Why are these very essential steps have not seen more resolve in either through NASA or through startups. But the blockchain is interesting because I don't want to go too deep. It created or is creating currently a financial revolution, and I just came from 2 conferences here actually in California, one in San Francisco, one in Los Angeles itself, and there's a lot going on with the ability to raise funds on a global level that wasn't possible before, and of course there was this ICO bubble a few years ago where anybody could just with the press of a button create a stock, if you will, and with extreme liquidity and ease of tracking ownership and all of the benefits of traditionally an IPO market. And so the whole blockchain revolution has created a way, an additional possible way to fund companies. Obviously, one has to take in regulations which are not just on the space or energy nuclear side gregarious. There's a big problem also in the financial world. But I think the blockchain immutable ledger idea is a way to possibly fundraise in an audience that before was much more difficult to reach.
Now, blockchain and things like Bitcoin have gotten a bad rap lately. How do you respond to the criticisms that some people have about there being so much fraud in that industry?
Well, I think it's kind of a complicated issue. I remember a talk with someone which was really good when the phone was invented in the beginning. The first big customers were the mobsters taking advantage of suddenly organizing the crime across the country, which before they weren't able to. So I think every new technology that is fundamentally changing the way we interoperate with each other has an advantage, and people who need it will take advantage of it, and crime is very clever, if you will. But besides that, the fundamental idea of having a digital database that is not controllable by one entity, that is just a breakthrough revolution in computer science, right? So the innovation behind it that Bitcoin was an example for made it possible for the first time to have a digital ledger that typically your bank or PayPal would have in complete ownership over, make that a peer-to-peer system so that anybody can contribute and no one particular party is in full control over it. So it allows a different type of financial system, which I think we haven't even fathomed yet or gotten to the bottom of what it might make possible.
Yeah, I think for me, the idea of blockchain is something that could be used on Mars in the sense that you could track resources from the time they are created or harvested. You know, maybe if you're creating methane fuel from the Martian air, you could actually track each unit of Martian fuel on a blockchain and see how it is used, how it's transported, and you'll have a public ledger of all the activity there. I think that's one use, and you're seeing a lot of that happen on Earth with some of the different agricultural industries. They're trying to start using the blockchain to track the growth of food and manufacture and sale of food. So, you know, there's things like that I think there's applications people haven't really thought of yet that you could use the blockchain for. So again, I have this LinkedIn article. I'm going to show a website I'll address at the end of this talk where you can get access to that article and also some other resources that we have available for people that are interested in creating startups. But what I want to go into now is kind of the nuts and bolts of how to start a company and some of the things that you should think about, some of the things that you should do, some of the questions you should ask yourself. If you're interested in starting a company. I've actually been experiencing this myself. Me and a couple of my colleagues started a consulting company back in February, and it's called Artic Consulting, and we actually specialize in helping startups. We also do Microsoft cloud migrations, and so some of the information I'm going to show today is also some of the stuff that we help some of our clients with. So this is basically a step 1 through 10 of what you would need to do to start a company in the United States. Some of these activities are going to be dependent on which state you live in, but you know, making sure that you have a good idea and understand the landscape that your idea might operate in, making sure that those who support you are on board with your idea, and then going through some of the logistics of setting up a company, registering, deciding which kind of corporate structure you're going to have, and there's some options there, C Corp or an S Corp or an LLC partnership. Depending on the type of company that you're going to form, you may want to have legal counsel help you to decide which structure to use and how many founders are involved with that. And then things like making sure that you are looking at all the regulations for the industry you're going to operate in. Most businesses have to worry about things like Sarbanes-Oxley, which basically mandates that people keep good financial records and records of their operations so that they can later be audited if they need to be audited. So planning ahead from the start and thinking about these things at the beginning of starting a company makes it a lot easier to set things up so that when you get bigger, then it's not as hard to do. Sean, do you have anything to add to all that?
Yeah, so obviously, well, let me ask real quick, and this may be an obvious question in this room, but how many of you, if given the opportunity, would go to Mars? Okay.
All the hands went up.
Yeah, that's what I figured. So I think, what you're seeing here is a lot of things to think about and a lot of things to do. I think you can compare starting a business to going to Mars, both in terms of time frame and in terms of complexity. So, Mars is distant and complex and expensive right now, and an exit from a startup is probably in a similar vein. And so, as you look at this list, first of all, don't be bogged down. These are necessary steps, but to James's point, if you think about those things, you don't have to dwell on them, but just check them off the list and get them right in the beginning, and then it's smooth sailing. It's just like mission planning. It's how you approach it. And so I'm sure we'll get into this discussion of why. Why do you want to start a business? Why did you start a business? And how does it align with you as a person, your values, your background? What's your risk tolerance? What can you afford to lose? What are your career goals? So, we see these examples of people who have made so much money in the media with tech companies, and those are somewhat of the rarities, but you can make a perfectly good living on a business that isn't a Facebook type scale. But again, just aligning it to what you care about, what your values are, so that you can add value to others.
And we should say that starting a company can be a very positive and life-changing experience. It's something that you can really get a lot of fulfillment out of taking one of your ideas and turning it into something tangible. So, next slide. So one of the items on this list is the business plan, which is number 3. So the next slide kind of goes deep on that. These are all the ingredients of a solid business plan. And if you're going to go take something like a business plan and talk to others about it, try to get funding for your company or try to find partnerships, these are really all things you should be thinking about and have in your business plan. The business plan itself can literally be a Word document that just has all these as sections, or it might be a set of materials. And there's lots of resources online to help you figure out how to do all these things. And we have some of those on the website I'll show you at the end that we've set up. One of the things to mention is marketing. And in 2019, you really need to think about social media and how that interacts with your marketing. Back in the day, a lot of folks would just use print marketing or take ads out in classified or ads in newspapers. But these days, really, the primary way to do marketing is online. And you have to reach people where they are online. So whether that's Facebook or Instagram or LinkedIn or Twitter or YouTube, all those places, there's different groups of people and different types of people that use those in different ways. And so understanding who your potential customers might be and where they are online is a really critical aspect to all this. And then this is all of the potential funding sources a company could typically have. Crowdsourcing your idea is definitely one of the most popular ways in 2019 to start a company. It's a way to test out whether your idea is a good one and also get funding at the same time. And then there's also a lot of the traditional ways of talking to venture capitalists, talking to angel investors. Up in Seattle, there are events that we have pretty often where people go and pitch their startup ideas, and others will poke holes in them and try to find fault or areas, gaps in them that then they can correct. So it's kind of, there's a way to do this where you're actually getting better every time at pitching your idea. There's also, if you've ever watched the show Shark Tank, I think that's a really good example of how some of those meetings are. But definitely I would recommend, if you're not going to get venture capital funding, if you have a business idea, to go present it at an event like that and get feedback from everybody there. So there's also a lot of organizations of retired executives in the various states that will review your business plan and may help to connect you with funding for your plan. And then these are some of the profit and loss models for a business. So basically a revenue model for a company. How does a company make money? Obviously is a really important aspect of its operations. And these are all the ways that a company typically can make money in the United States. And so, the traditional one, marking up a product that you've bought wholesale or that you manufactured yourself, is one way to make profit from a product. But there's other things too, like licensing, and that's how most software programs make money, is you're actually purchasing a license to use the software. And because those are ephemeral, you don't have to go manufacture licenses, you just issue them out. That keeps the cost down for a product like the software. Let's see what else. Anything to add?
Yeah. So the interesting thing, of course, in the space industry is like you're faced with this big hurdle that some of the ideas and projects would just require enormous amounts of capital, right? And so you may have some great ideas, but currently still there's a lot of funding, if you will, locked up in government, or that's been the traditional way of fundraising. And I really applaud Rick Tomlinson yesterday. He didn't talk too much about his space fund, but that's a very, very interesting idea of kind of pooling investor capital together. And of course, there's a lot of restrictions in the US. Someone has to be accredited investor. But the idea here was to pool all of these funds together and then kind of almost become an incubator for ideas. The other approach is if it's something that is more tangible, an idea. Sometimes you have an idea, a product or service you want to build, but taking a detour that creates cash flow, and that's something investors obviously are going to look for, that your company is profitable. The earlier you can get to that point, the better. And it may be a detour. It might be something that is not necessarily exactly what you're headed to, but it might take you there. It might take you closer. And what I'm really interested or fascinated by is the space revolution here created a lot of new entrepreneurs that are tackling things. The energy sector. We just had an amazing talk about the nuclear power requirements. Outerworldly, if you will, but extremely valuable here on Earth as well. And that's almost a detour that someone could take in trying to create something that's of benefit right here, and might make it easier to fundraise, and then of course take these systems and turn them into something that's also of value for the space industry.
Awesome. Okay. Then the next couple slides are questions you should ask yourself. If you're going to start a company, make sure that you can go through these questions and that you have good answers for them. So things like, what problem am I solving? What is the competitive advantage I have? Like, what's my company's special sauce over others in my area? How much of my time will this consume? Is my life ready to start a company right now? Or is there a better time? Should I wait? Maybe I wait till I graduate, from my master's degree, or, maybe there's a better time in the future for me after I complete a move or something like that. Also, like, what funds do I absolutely need to start? A lot of times people get excited about starting a business and they'll go just start buying stuff like QuickBooks and, licenses and things like that. But really, you should be thoughtful about your spending. you should come up with a budget and really don't do anything rash. Make sure that whatever funds you're spending are being done wisely and they're absolutely necessary for the business. And then a few other questions. Being realistic about how much of your time and effort this is going to take. And again, are you ready to do this at this point in your life? Are you starting from a position of strength, a positive position, or are you starting a business because something bad just happened to you? You don't want to start a business as a response to something negative. You want to start a business from a position of strength. So, can I test run the business part-time while I'm still working in my current job? A lot of people do that to really make sure that they have a viable business before they lose their security blanket of their existing job. That's a smart approach as well. And then finally, never focus on plan B. You want to have an exit strategy. You might have seen on the business plan slide, exit strategy. That doesn't mean you failed. It just means you have a smart way to get out of the business. Maybe you're going to sell it to somebody, one of the investors, or you're going to look for additional partners. So that's different than actually failing. You don't want to plan to fail. You want to plan to succeed. Okay.
Yeah, maybe regarding the exit, that might be very confusing too, but I think most investors, if you do look for investments or funding, angel funding, they will all want to know what is your exit strategy. They will want to know how their capital comes back to them, right? And that's one of the issues with a traditional funding approach. This money is locked up for most investors for a long time before they see a return on their investment. And here, just to kind of harken back to the blockchain idea, where you can tokenize a company's equity and make it tradable instantaneously. That was one of the big benefits, of course, of the blockchain systems based on Ethereum. But yeah, I just wanted to mention that because exits can sometimes sound, like you mentioned, strange if you haven't launched a company in the past, but it's a super important aspect of planning.
Yeah, so this is so fascinating. Like, the time that we're living in and what the possibilities are versus what they used to be. 20 years ago when maybe Dr. Zubrin and Rick Tumlinson and people like that were like, hey, government has done a great job with NASA, but it's time to get private industry involved, and here we are. And, I can't think of any other example on Earth better than SpaceX and Elon Musk to take this grand vision where, most people you're going to say that's just not possible. It's just not going to work. Set aside for a minute Elon's reserves that he put in to fund SpaceX and just take his character and spirit and approach where he said, there's a problem, no one's solving it, why not? Okay, well, is this a solution? No. Is this solution? No. And eventually he just kept asking the question, and that led to SpaceX, and now the vision is to colonize Mars. But it's not like, okay, we got to colonize Mars like next week. It's like, okay, there are some interim steps before we can colonize Mars. So how do we make money while we develop the technology we need to go to Mars? So I'm guessing for a lot of you out there, you have some really cool, ambitious ideas and visions for your product or service that have to do with Mars, and they probably are, they may be capital intensive. So I would encourage you to invert the pyramid. So say, okay, that's where I want to go, but like the ideas that James talked about, if you want to provide the best coffee on Mars, how do you connect those dots? You're going to start a coffee company on Earth. Are you going to get into, the agricultural side of the business? But connect those dots. Don't be discouraged by, that number where you think, I need a wealthy donor. People like Lennart, these alternative financing vehicles, and starting with a less capital intensive business. I will just add at RBC Signals, Chris Richens, founder and CEO, started it 4 years ago, former Boeing sea launch guy. He just said, there's all this excess capacity in ground stations on the market. All these low Earth orbit ground stations that were built, essentially one satellite to one ground station for one mission. Once the mission's over, the dish is just sitting there, but it was a CapEx expense for millions of dollars. Chris went on and said, hey, can we resell your time to customers who need it. So kind of aggregating existing capacity in a quote unquote asset light model, which is, space. Our challenge is to raise money in the traditional manner is, it's very capital intensive, and investors know that, and they're used to software, which is like a 3-year exit. So space is more long term. But if you can find a way to kind of crowdsource and share existing resources to get your business off the ground, that's worked at RBC Signals, and I would encourage you to look at your own businesses in that light.
Awesome. So, in closing, we've set up this website here, and we set up a survey on there that I'd love for all of you to take that gives us feedback on this panel, but also if you're interested in starting a company or want to be connected with other people that are interested in starting a company, we'd like to help you do that. And we're actually asking for, what are some of the opportunities we've mentioned or others that you may have that you're interested in pursuing. And we can connect you, we can help you provide resources. I mentioned my company, Artic Consulting. We can actually help you with some of the logistical details and also to help find funding as well. So definitely take advantage of the survey. I'd love it if to get feedback on this panel, and also to help connect folks together to start companies that are going to help us settle Mars someday. And then one other thing I'll mention, there are a few other resources on that website. So it's Dr. Alex MacDonald's research. I've also linked on there. He has a really fascinating map of the solar system by human development opportunities that I recommend you check out. So I think we have time for a question or two. It looks like there's one in the back there.
My advisor said to use the word pain.
Pain point. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I think that's wonderful, actually. Yeah, so the question was to use the idea of pain. Like, what kind of pain are you trying to solve? I think that's excellent. If you see a niche, you see a problem, there's actually demand for it. Go after that, definitely. Sometimes we're overcomplicating things. The idea of a company is a group of people that get together because they see a need, a demand for something, and I think. From the funding side, more and more opportunities are rising simply because the space revolution is kind of creating these opportunities at the same time. So absolutely, I think you're hitting the nail on the head.
Yeah, if I could just chime in there, I was listening to a Madrona Ventures podcast on that topic, and basically they made the point that, is the pain bad enough that it's going to make your customer get off the couch and buy your product or service? Because if it's not, you could waste, you could be wasting your time. You could be wasting 1 or 2 years. So find that, it's nobody's pain point that they can't settle Mars today. It may be painful for them in a few years, but they don't know it yet. But what is that pain point, that extremely painful problem they have today that connects to that problem? Yeah.
Question at the microphone?
Hi, thank you for that talk. So I read a number that there's, $25 billion of investment in space. Can you give us a breakdown of how much is going towards solutions or towards Mars rather than Leo or Moon or, something else?
Yeah, I think for the most part, when people talk about all the money that's in the space industry, it's for the most part in the satellite industry. Isn't that right, Sean?
Yeah, I think satellite as a segment is the hot segment. I think if you looked at how much SpaceX has raised and whether you consider that Mars related, that has to be, in my mind, the lion's share of Mars related startup as a portion of overall investment. I would agree with James that mega constellation satellites, things like that, things happening in low Earth orbit would be new investment would be the largest portion.
And whatever the number is for Mars, it's not enough right now. Question.
One of the fringe benefits of a startup also is that it's a great way to get into a field that you're new to, because you can start your own LLC for $100 and then basically go off and work on something, have real results, go and speak in conferences, and then you'll discover there'll be companies that will want to grab you and say, hey, we've been looking for an expert in this field where we can't find anyone, and that's what happened to me, basically.
Awesome.
Also, I moved into Redmond just about a year ago, right next door was Planetary Resources.
Yes.
Do you have any idea what happened to them? Did they all go off to space like Seattle and get hired?
I believe Planetary Resources was purchased by another company. Do you
Yeah,
know?
it was purchased by a blockchain organization for
that's
pennies
by
on the dollar.
consensus.
Consensus.
Yeah,
The
The
actually,
question is, what happened to Planetary Resources, which is a mining company based in Bellevue, Washington?
Yeah. If I might add, I meant to mention Planetary Resources as a cautionary tale. They were very fond of saying the first trillionaires will be made in space. And they had big backers like Larry Page and Richard Branson and James Cameron and people like that.
Ross Perot Jr.
Yep, Ross Perot Jr., and they spent like it. And they, I think, overlooked things like Earth observation as a way to make money, to bring in short-term revenue that could lead to mining asteroids. And I think they took their eye off the ball. I don't know, they couldn't complete a funding round. That was why they actually had to shut down and be sold for pennies on the dollar. So it's, yeah.
In that sense, I'm very conservative. So cash flow is king, right? So in many regards. But the interesting thing about particular this example with Planetary Resources, in 2017, when there was a lot of hype and the cryptocurrencies went through the roof, there were funding rounds that were closing in the crypto space, hundreds of millions of dollars within seconds. Of launching a token for some ideas were completely outlandish, a bad business plan or no business plan whatsoever, and of course the SEC reined this in, and like 99% of all startups fail, or 90% of all startups fail. It's a high number. In this particular case, there were a lot of scams among them too. But it showed that there's a possibility, and I think we were seeing actually what's called security token. We were seeing a kind of using the same technology, but on a regulated side, a resurgence. It's still being tested out with the SEC, but we may, in a couple of years, let's say 5 or so, have a chance on regulated exchanges be able to buy tokens of companies that have some very fascinating business plans, and and then tap into the liquidity pool, not just in the United States, but globally. And I think that's kind of exciting and will give an option for a lot of people too.
Okay, last 2 questions, go ahead.
Okay, if you have a company and you're getting investments from the cryptocurrency world, how do you make absolutely certain that it's not foreign or criminal investment that will forever bar you from government contracting?
That's a great question.
Yeah, so what we have currently is there's just the last conference I attended, there are several platforms now. They work closely with the SEC, and what they basically do is they become a hub where all the investors have to go through an AML KYC process so that they're identified who the investors are and that they are accredited, which in the United States still have to be for most of these funding rounds. So you just have to take a look, right? You can't just take anybody's money and run with it. That's not going to work, right? So but there's enough companies out there that tackle that space, and there's a clear path forward if you are interested in doing it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes.
Hi, Inga Popovaita from University of Iowa. So first of all, thank you for the talk. Very informative. Learned a lot. However, I would like to hear your philosophy and opinions on topic on diversity, inclusion, and social responsibility of space startups. Can you just comment on that?
That's a great question, Inga. And I think every company in the United States needs to have a story about what is their policy on equality, equal pay between the genders, diversity. And there are laws that everyone should follow to the letter. And that's really in the HR kind of department. Here at Artic Consulting, we actually make use of some stuff we got from ADP to set up our HR department, and it gave us great templates for how to establish policies for your company that adhere to all those things you mentioned. And so I think it's super important, and we're seeing in the news every day companies that aren't doing that very well, and the backlash they're getting as a result. So it's very important. Great question.
Can I just add my 2 cents there? So there's a book called The Overview Effect by Frank White, and it's basically, it's interviews with the astronauts and their experiences when they go to space and how it changes them as a person and what that means for human evolution. And basically, so Frank, I've gotten to know, has become a good friend of mine. We talk regularly and thinking about, looking back on different epochs of human exploration and how we went about that. and what do we learn? What are we learning here as we go out into space, and how are we going to do it differently? And if you look at, for example, the International Space Station, and everybody living and working together from different nations, different genders, different backgrounds, and yet, here they are in the dining area of the ISS and feeling like they're just one people. And so thinking about how space exploration will change us, it's not an HR-related thought, but more of an evolutionary thought where, we have done things a certain way, how we can do this consciously as we move into space based on what we learn.
I think just one final thought is, I think all of us agree that we do not want access to space to be elitist, right? Everyone here, I think, really would like to open that frontier up for the general public, for everybody included. I think that's really, really important to get that as fast as possible.
Thank you.
All right, thanks a lot, everybody.
Yeah. Thank you, James. Thank you, Lennart. And thank you, Sean, for the panel today.